Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining our webinar, brought to you by Magaya, the leading platform in logistics and supply chain automation. For those who don't know me, my name is Alfred, and I'm the Marketing Operations Manager here. And today, I'll also be filling in the role of moderator during your webinar. Remember, here at Magaya, we don't work on tips, but applause is always appreciated. All right, let's jump right in. I think we can all agree that the effects of COVID-19 have been felt across every industry around the world. The logistics and shipping sectors are no exception. They're facing major challenges as they work to meet and maintain the supply demand while still protecting their workers from infection. Add to this the restrictions on travel and movement in effect around the globe, and it really has been a challenging time for the entire freight forwarding industry. During today's webinar, we will be discussing how to handle the supply chain during a crisis and offer some insight on how to make your business thrive. Before we begin, though, we have a few housekeeping rules and notices that we'd like to share with you. Good news, everyone walks away from today's webinar with a prize. The prize is your very own recording of this webinar. You're welcome. We have some amazing polls, amazing because I did not write them. Please participate in them. You'll be glad you did. And lastly, at the end, we will have a Q&A session with our speakers. And speaking of speakers, here are our speakers for today. First up, your guys are in for a real treat. We have two very energetic and enthusiastic speakers, not as energetic and knowledgeable as I am, but then again, here we are. First up, we have Scott Case. Scott is the founder and chief storyteller for Position Global. He received his custom broker's license back in 1994 and has traveled extensively around the globe to meet with partners, customers, and manufacturers. After close to 3 decades as a licensed customs broker and freight forwarder, Scott has accumulated a massive amount of experience and is a highly sought after public speaker who has presented to audiences around the world, which include importers, exporters, students, peers, government officials, and general audiences on a variety of topics. Next up, also presenting is Mitch Nemmers. Mitch is the Vice President of Coastal and Inland Markets at our very own Magaya. Mitch has broad experience in software, manufacturing, and logistics. He began his career in international logistics and sourcing, followed by many years in the warehousing and transportation space, managing operations in the Pacific Northwest, Northern California, and trans-Canadian shipments for one of the largest trucking companies in North America. Recently, Mitch has been engaged in enterprise software sales and now leads the Magaya team in new markets. So, without any further ado, Scott, take it away.
Thank you very much, Alfred, and thank you to everybody who's taking time on a Thursday afternoon to be here. I know how important these things are, educational opportunities. I know we're all sort of burned out, but not being able to see humans in person. So we decided to try and take it a little bit more personal, which means you get to see Mitch and I on camera for good or for bad. But we figured if nothing else, having a face to go along with the voice that you're hearing thrown at you through your speakers or through your headphones would make a slight difference. I really do appreciate everyone being here today. We're all 8, 10, 12 weeks into this now. We've certainly feel like it's gotten into a little bit more of a TikTok rhythm after some of the initial panic that we had to go through. So we're here today to talk about what's going on right now. Here we are 3 months in. We're looking ahead, regardless of what state we live in, what country we're in, and the different phases for getting reopened and for business to be staggering starts, not just in our respective states. I mean, the thing about what we all do for a living is that our customers are scattered around the world and scattered throughout the country. So we're going to have to cope with the fact that different offices within our own organizations, different customers may be restarting at different speeds. And how are we going to handle that? So the challenges that we're going to be talking about today, first are the extreme shifts in demand that we're seeing happen out there. We're going to be looking at manufacturing slowdowns and restrictions. We're going to be taking a look at the evolving trade restrictions, both here and again overseas. What the impact on transport has been. Certainly we're all feeling that first-handedly. And finally, just how are we going to manage these social distancing requirements that are going to be coming up within our organizations. So the first thing that we want to talk about is we want to talk about the extreme shifts in demand and what we're going to be facing. So 80% of companies today believe that they're going to be impacted by COVID-19 disruptions. This information comes to us from the Institute for Supply Chain Management. And I don't think that anyone who doesn't operate a business or hasn't been directly impacted by this doesn't realize what we're happening to be going through with this. These shifts in demand have changed as we see numbers up. I saw today, Target was up 140% for their online product. Walmart was up 71% with their online deliveries. And in the same time this week, we're getting news that Victoria's Secret, Pier 1, Macy's are all looking to close. J. Crew filed for bankruptcy. So this is really going to be pushing the way that people receive their goods, the way people shop for their goods, into an entirely different channel. And because of this, we're going to have to say to ourselves as freight forwarders, how is this going to change? Are we going to be having to look at more at last mile options for our customers? More on that later that Mitch will be talking about, but we're going to have to sort of figure out if things aren't going to that big box retailer anymore, if we're not doing truckload deliveries, how far upstream do we have to move that to be ready for people to be able to handle their cargo and to do things for them and on their behalf? The next thing we're going to be having to talk about are manufacturing slowdowns and restrictions. There's no question that things have been changing in that factor and in that space. We're starting to see places opening up slowly but surely. And the question is, how are they able to open? How are they able to make these manufacturing changes operate within the spaces in which these companies operate? Again, look at somebody like Ford Motor Company, who just opened up 2 plants within the last week or two. And as quick as they opened those plants up, unfortunately, they found COVID patients within them. The meat packing is another sector where we're seeing closures, and how do we get that back? How do we ensure that that supply chain continues to happen? But more importantly, if we think about the fact that supply chains are global, I mean, if you sit down and you look at a bill of materials for anything, even the ventilators that General Electric and Ford are trying to build together, I believe that the bill of materials for it is somewhere north of 200 parts. And if you think about the fact that not all of those are going to come from the same place, you're going to need supply chains. You're going to need different specialty manufacturers to get them going. How are we going to be able to do that? If you're an automaker and you're used to having people working side by side on a production line, how do you manage social distancing while people are supposed to be keeping 6 feet away from each other and you're moving giant beams or frames or heavy things that you have to get into place? So regardless of the type of manufacturing you're doing, regardless of the type of processing you're doing, the questions are going to be, how are we able to get this started? In Europe, for instance, I was talking with a client and there's restrictions on trucks coming and going from these facilities. Drivers are going to have to show up with their own PPE. They're going to expect to have their temperatures taken at the gate before they're able to get into the facility. Everybody is trying to find adaptations that are going to make it possible for them to be able to open and remain open and to serve the demand of the customers that they happen to have. Fully 75% of companies reported supply chain disruptions. Again, the source for that is the Institute for Supply Chain Management. And again, this comes as no surprise to anyone, as we've seen sort of the staggered closures and openings that happened first in Asia, followed the sun westward into Europe as mainland Europe, and then eventually the US, Canada, and Mexico were the last ones to close. And now, as we've seen again, that Asia has reopened, Europe is starting to stick a toe into reopening. And the question is, how are we going to do the same thing here in the United States right now? Something else we have to consider actually are the evolving trade restrictions that are in place. The ones that are most notable, certainly here in the United States, are FEMA demanding that they have final approval on any kind of exports of personal protective equipment that is sent from the United States out to the rest of the world. So FEMA is going to want to look at that and sign off on it, not unlike an export license. We saw the same thing in Europe, where European customs officials were scanning manifests, and they would see products like fabric or plastic sheeting, and they would ask, can this be used to manufacture PPE here in Europe for the European countries and the citizens of those nations that were being impacted by COVID? Is this allowed to be exported? Now, the most recent version of it that we're seeing is taking place in China, where there's huge backlogs at Pudong Airport in Shanghai, owing to the fact that there are restrictions on when cargo can be delivered. But more importantly, the Chinese government, who's been caught up with a lot of counterfeits being manufactured and exported, both in terms of PPE, masks, and even more importantly, test kits, the Chinese government has stepped in and is imposing more manual checks before these goods go out of the country, which are slowing things down, which are restricting the ability for the goods to get out as well. Which cascades into the next slide that we have up here, which is talking about the overall impact on transport. There is no mode of transport which has not been affected by this. When the pandemic first began, we had the situation where containers were all out of place. So we had container imbalance, which has unfortunately continued as this has gone on, because ocean carriers have blanked sailings and they're trying to decide what's the best amount of capacity, what are the requisite number of vessels and sailings, and how much space do we sell on them? And more importantly, they're trying to maintain a healthy level of rates to avoid a bankruptcy, not unlike Hanjin that happened a number of years ago and left a lot of shippers in jeopardy. So the question is, how can these carriers remain healthy? How can ports remain healthy? The Spanish government said that they're going to provide up to $100 million worth of financial assistance to ports within Spain, because they realize that the traffic is down, because ports make their money with vessel calls and container lifts and tonnage that's handled through break bulk. So the impact on them is being tangible as well. Everybody in air freight knows that it's basically tripled, if not quintupled. And with the disappearance of with the disappearance of belly space all over the world, things have fallen to freighters. And those freighters were filling the gap until passenger operators sought permission from and got permission from the FAA and from the European Union to be able to carry cargo in the passenger compartments. Air Canada even, for instance, took 3 777s that they had, stripped out the entire interior cabins, and are now carrying cargo in the passenger section of their aircraft. So these airlines are being more and more clever at ways to both support the initiatives, but also to make sure that the PPE is still coming into the United States. Because as we've seen, there are still healthcare professionals, there are still frontline health workers that don't have this. And even as we see things start to peak and we start to see the curve getting flattened, the concerns about more of this coming in the fall or possibly the winter means that the stockpiles that weren't there in the national strategic stockpiles are going to have to be replenished. So there's really no reason for anybody to take their foot off the pedal in terms of the manufacturing. However, the question is going to become, when do passengers feel safe traveling? Sure, we've seen airlines rolling out cleaning plans. United, I believe, partnered with Clorox, and they're finding ways to do cabin cleaning. They're talking about the air filtration happening within it. But I think for all of us who've been home for a very long period of time and around nobody but maybe first or intimate family and a small group of close friends, whether or not we want to climb back into an airplane just packed in with people literally shoulder to shoulder with us, until people are willing to go back to that, we're not going to see the return of that belly space, both domestically and internationally. And that's going to continue to constrain the available space. Even in light of reduced demand, it's still going to constrain available space and cause challenges for us. Road freight as well is trying to find the balance. A lot of dry goods not moving, a lot of perishable goods moving between grocery stores, warehouse clubs, places like that. That's keeping a lot of folks moving. And the number that dropped from air freight was really surprising. It didn't come as a surprise to any of us, but 85% of air freight capacity was lost. And that information was courtesy of Stephen Robertson, who wrote a piece about the role of freight forwarders in the COVID-19 crisis. So we're seeing and we're continuing to see what's going to be happening for people. Medical supplies have eaten up a lot of that trucking capacity. We're watching very closely as well what's happening with the rail, because there's not a lot of coal traveling, because power generation demand is down. Automotive is something that is used to be traveling by rail. We're not seeing a lot of that happening, and particularly intermodal. I mean, with the decline in consumer demand coupled with the drop in the international ocean freight traffic, we're seeing a decline across a lot of these sectors. And what we're really hoping for is we're hoping for financial safety, and we're hoping that these companies are able to come out of with what they need. Something else that we're having to deal with and talk about really is social distancing and employee absenteeism. Let's face it, everybody went home. Everybody's been told to stay together by staying away. Because they're having to do this, folks have gotten used to sort of working, folks have gotten used to us working in an environment where you're not around other people. As a result of that fact, we're saying to ourselves, okay, how are we going to be able to come back together into a space? How are we going to be able to do things where we're around other people, where we feel comfortable being around other people right now? And it's a challenging question that we don't really have an answer to, unfortunately. As a result of that fact, we're looking and going, how do we reconfigure our offices? How do we rearrange for people to come back? And how do we make people feel comfortable that they're able to come back to work in the first place? I know, just as the president of the Air Cargo Association in Chicago, we're planning a webinar next month with a company that manufactures some protective sheeting and screening and spacing for people to be able to work together and to say, okay, how are we going to be able to be together when you look at the spread and the transmission and the risk of things that happen to come along with that. So we were going to take a poll, and I apologize for that. We're having some technical difficulties in the background, so I'm going to just go past the poll if nobody minds that too terribly. And we're going to talk about 5 tips that we have to help people persevere during a crisis. How are we going to be able to manage? What are we going to do to come out the other end of this thing? The first thing that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to develop a crisis management plan. I think that for people who are in South Florida, like where the Magaya team is, you're used to having that hurricane preparedness plan. What happens when that storm's coming? And you say to yourself, we know that we're going to be offline for a finite period of time, but this has really sort of been open-ended. So it's caused people to have to say, what's not just the disaster plan and recovery, but what's the disaster and sustained change in business theory plan? And that's where I think we're all coming together and we're all saying to ourselves, how does this happen? Whether or not we've got something that we do within CTPAT, whether or not we've got something that we've come up with for whatever other kind of standards that we need for our own business continuity, we're going to have that crisis management plan. The second thing that I say is to respond with purpose. From a leader's point of view, everyone is scared. Everyone is nervous. They see the unemployment numbers. People see the drop in their business. People see people around them getting sick or trying to avoid getting sick. And so we're going to have to say to ourselves that the focus of people is not always going to be on the business. As leaders, as managers, we're going to be responsible for listening to people, for caring for people, for demonstrating that, for having a little bit more understanding than we otherwise would. I've been very fortunate that our company works remotely to begin with. My team is scattered around the US and around the world. And we've always had a very sort of at home, at a closer relationship than a typical office environment. I think that it's going to be very interesting to see sort of the mindset and the change that happens over time, to see whether or not companies become, softer isn't necessarily the right word, but become more empathetic. And for those that already had a lot of empathy, do they have to show it in a different way to the people who work for them? We're going to have to look as well on end-to-end supply chain constraint management. We're going to have to ask ourselves, how are we going to do with this? We're going to have to realize that production is going to be capped. There's going to be a finite amount that can be done as factories open and close, as workforces are sort of transitory. Not unlike the post-Chinese New Year trying to get factories restarted back up again. What's going to sort of be the baseline recalibrated amount that somebody can get to from a production point of view? If they were doing 10,000 units of something a day, if that's not going to happen, how do we move those 8,000? How do we book? How do we plan? How do we secure space for those people, for those 8,000? And how do we deal with restricted numbers of vessels, restricted choices for air cargo? How are supply chains going to have to plan differently? Is it nearshoring? Is it larger warehousing? Is it more inventory that needs to get carried? These are all things that we're going to have to think about and entertain and manage. We're going to have to as well enable workforce flexibility. It's going to be very key to understand that we've had people at home now for 10 or 12 weeks. Where maybe if you're a business that has that disaster plan for people to work remotely, it's for a couple of days, it's for a week, it's 2 weeks until power gets restored or something else happens. Now we're asking ourselves, how can we give people those mobile tools? I remember, and again, I'm a dinosaur at this. The thing that I loved when I was a customs broker, and I still am a broker, but I love that big tangible feeling that comes with holding a 25-pound tariff. Not everybody that does customs brokerage can have a 25-pound tariff on their back or on their desk. Not everybody can have a paper copy of the OAG available to them to know what flight details are and what options there are. So we're going to have to ask ourselves, how do we give employees a distributed set of tools that they can access via cloud to be able to do this? But then more importantly, how do we also make sure that we've got network security as we're looking ahead to do this? The final thing too is we're going to have to harvest innovations to think about what the next normal is. I'm loath to use the words new normal or pivot. Those kind of feel like the current day bingo drinking games, if you will, of blockchain from about a year ago or a year and a half ago. But the question now is, what's the next normal going to be? What are the innovations that we're going to see have happen? What technological things can we put in place for connectivity? What tools can we give people to work, whether it be our salespeople who aren't able to go and travel and work their territory, whether it be our operations people who are used to gathering around somebody's desk to hash out a meeting? How do we help people do that? And more importantly, how are our customers going to be able to find ways to reach their customers, to make sure that they have that safety stock, to better anticipate those demands and those needs? And that's going to be something that's going to be very critical for all of us to help them work through. As I said, I apologize for the fact that our polls aren't working. So we're just going to keep working through, and we're going to talk about how we're going to be doing this stuff. So the three phases that we're going to look at for overcoming the crisis, we're going to have to consider three areas. We're going to have to figure out how to respond. We're going to have to figure out how to recover. And then we're also going to have to figure out how to thrive. So we're knee deep in the response phase of this right now. So there's no question that we're keeping this going. We're talking, we're engaged with our customers. We're finding ways to be able to work with them right now. And they're finding ways to be able to work with us. Phones, mobiles, we're all just sort of melanging into a space. The recovery period is obviously going to be the recuperation period that follows all of this stuff. I think the recovery period is going to be the slow but staggered opening. Is your company already working with, say, an A team and a B team to be able to get through this? And if you have to have people staffing the office, if somebody does test positive, how do you then do a deep clean? How do you bring that next team in? How do we ensure that continuity of business? Because this is something that's going to be happening. The community spread is reduced, the curve is being flattened, but the virus is not going away. So it is still always realistically possible that we're going to have to deal with this until such time when a vaccine is in place, is widely distributed, and the global population is sufficiently inoculated. And finally, the businesses that are going to thrive are the ones that learn the lessons and execute it on their plans. So the question is, can you pivot into doing something new? Did you discover something about your company, your leaders within your company, the technology or the software vendors or the processes that you were using to go in and do that job and to be able to make that happen? So how are we going to be able to move on from that? We also have to think about the adaptability and the agility of this. So we've got to have a remote workforce to be able to work together. We're going to have to be able to say to ourselves, how can people in different places, not just within a city, but now across cities, be able to work together? Maybe you were used to having that virtual call with somebody in an office overseas in another time zone. Now you're having to have that virtual call with your teammates that you were used to being 2, 3, 4 feet away from. How is that going to be different? The cloud-based systems are going to be what we need to maintain and keep this thing going. Those bunkers were those things that are pretty much bulletproof, but they're still run by humans, and we're still going to have to make sure that those clouds are there, that they are robust and redundant to ensure continuity of business. Maybe we have to move to round-the-clock shifts. If you do global logistics, you're already used to sort of that around-the-clock feeling for what it's like with the world, and the question is, do we now have to, in order to keep people distant, have a first shift? Have a second shift? Are our customers going to need something now in the overnights when maybe capacity is available, or you can get a crew into a warehouse that you don't get an overlap on? Do we have to be there? And finally, we've got to take a real-time holistic view at how this is going to all happen. With that now, I'm going to turn it over to Mitch, who's going to talk a little bit about what the Magaya supply chain is able to offer and help people out with. Mitch?
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. And sorry again for the technical difficulties we're having. I know our marketing team is trying to swap it back right now. But, as far as Magaya goes, first and foremost, it's a single platform for operations, accounting, tracking, connectivity, and compliance that really delivers unparalleled feature depth across the board. So it really enables your team to work more collaboratively, cohesively, and efficiently. So the system, in terms of what it does, is it provides real-time visibility to all aspects of your business and really allows you to make data-driven decisions, that are going to drive those efficiencies and agilities for better inventory tracking, as well as more precise shipping estimates, which is going to really give you a competitive advantage in a really necessary time. Plus, with the global pandemic impacting the supply chain, moving critical supplies such as food and medicine across international borders can be extra time consuming, and it needs to be done quickly and accurately, now especially more than ever. So in response, Magai has developed its AMS query extension. And what that does is it speeds up the cross-border logistics process, which really ensures the timely delivery and of that much needed cargo. So the great benefit of that is you can navigate customs and trade requirements, right from the Magai cloud-based platform, which means, no more of the endless scrolling, no more of the duplicate data entry, into the multiple systems. So in reality, you have all the information you need, right when and where you need it. So it's a really great tool and a great, flexibility option for you. Back to you, Scott.
Thanks, Mitch. Okay. We're going to now move on to the next slide. And thank you very much. Got us stuck there. So we're going to talk about transparency and communication. That is certainly something that's key for all of us right now as we're going through this. We want to make sure that stakeholders understand that there is a plan in place. I think that there's probably some secret sauce maybe, or just don't let them see a sweat that maybe you didn't do beforehand, but everybody's sweating right now. And I think that the more people understand, the more realistic expectations that are set in a very fluid environment are going to provide people with better intelligence. We have to address these challenges honestly. I mean, a lot of what we saw coming into this was AI, or artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, taking all of this stuff, hopping it into the big machine and spitting out going, this is what's coming and this is what's going to happen. Maybe with the exception of a small, tiny corner of the logistics community, I don't know if anybody was really prepared for this at the level to which that we've had to react to it. So let's be frank with people, that transparency is going to help and it's going to be the best thing. We're also going to have to rely on our partners at this point. Nobody goes it alone. We're certainly all just isolated in the spot that we're at right now. So consequently, we have to say to ourselves, how are we going to be able to find someone that we can work with that helps us get through this? Any small to medium-sized freight forwarder is possibly a member of a network right now, or coming out of this is certainly going to be looking at one, because the news is changing so fast everywhere around the world, be it in a city, be it in a country, be it here in the United States. And you're going to need to have people that are there, that are boots on the ground, that can give you the most accurate and give you the most up-to-date information that's available for people to understand what's going on. And finally, we're going to have to ensure that processes are in place for business continuity. That's going to be the most important thing about this. The show must go on, not unlike what we're doing here today. And thanks to the marketing team for keeping us going through all this stuff. But we're going to have to make sure that people understand that even if somebody gets sick, even if a shift has to be taken offline, even if whatever, we've got to make sure that we keep going into those processes are in place for that business continuity. Mitch, would you take this opportunity for everybody to talk a little bit about the Magai network and how that could play into the point that I raised about making sure that you have partners that you're working with around the US or just even around the world on this?
Sure. Thanks, Scott. Absolutely. I'd love to. So, at Magai, we see the supply chain itself as an interconnected and interdependent network. So that's why we've been able to provide our customers with the ability to leverage a real global partner network. And in using the Magai network, it provides our customers the ability to do things like, seamlessly share data, keep documents secure, and connect with other customers, but not just customers. You can connect with your destination agents, other Magai users, as well as US Customs. So a couple of the things that the Magai network also allows you to do is to publish an actual profile of your company on the Magai network, and that's visible to hundreds of potential supply chain partners. It also allows you to gain the power to connect, electronically and exchange transactions with attached documentation and any other type of information to another Magai database. And doing this, it really allows to reduce some of that redundant work and double entry across the entire supply chain, just making it more efficient and harnessing, those new tools that we have to speed things up. And so finally, what it also allows for is to really send those outbound shipments over the network, which convert automatically into inbound shipments in that destination database, just creating a lot more ease of transactional data and helping to drive, again, that speed and efficiency and just the quickness and better communication in the supply chain overall. Back to you, Scott.
Okay. So having discussed the Magai network, let's take a look at what the other things we have to think about: efficiency and automation. It's very important to have effective automation, where you could normally throw a group of people together in a room to solve a problem or to research data. We're now going to be really relying on that connectivity between different portals. We're going to need to make sure that the information that's in a warehouse system is able to connect into a brokerage system, is able to then drop down into a transportation management system, because the ability to either rekey it or research or pull paper is going to be very limited. So we're going to be extremely reliant on the information that's in systems and the portability of that information to be able to go from one place to the next effectively, quickly, and accurately. We're also going to want to empower our customers with self-service tools. People right now are just pretty much working from home at any given hour that they've got. Their children are home, their family members are around them. So a traditional 8 to 5 day, I think, for everybody has been pretty much just chucked out the window. So they're going to need to be able to have access to the things that they need to see, maybe early in the morning, late at night, when everything's quiet, when the house is shut down, or they're able to just sneak that time to do something that they need. And we're going to have to understand that we're going to have to provide service and solutions to our customers on their clocks, not necessarily on ours. We're going to need to be able to scale as needed. I think that everybody has seen the dip in what's happened right now, but we've also seen that the recoveries for these are going to be coming back. And we're going to have to say to ourselves, how are the processes that we're putting in place right now to operate in sort of a diverse and separated environment going to be able to translate into us all of a sudden absorbing a 15, 20, 25% spike? And this could be for our customers as well. When all of a sudden the orders come in, the factory ramps up, maybe they're working with a differently configured facility or workforce arrangement. How are we all going to be able to ramp up and get that thing done? And then finally, like I said, I think we're all going to need to be thinking about last mile logistics. I don't think that we could traditionally be thinking about this the way that we have beforehand, when it's going to be trucks going to very large facilities. It's going to be something entirely different. It's probably going to be getting right to our customer, maybe even to a small neighborhood, a co-op, whatever that happens to be. And that last leg of it, that final delivery to the ultimate recipient, is going to look a little bit different. And that's where we have to be thinking about and talking about final mile. Mitch?
Yeah, absolutely, Scott. And based on my past experience, that is a huge and crucial part of the supply chain that's growing, every single day. And as we kind of move towards the more Amazonian, lifestyle that we all unknowingly or knowingly enjoy, it's becoming more and more prevalent, like I said. So, first we'll start with a couple of extensions that the Magaya offers that could be a huge benefit right now, especially in this climate that we're in. And the first one being Final Mile, which is Magaya's last mile solution. So multiple drivers can use the app at the same time, and they can do things like, make pickups and deliveries. The app also allows each driver to see a map of, their tasks for the day, get turn-by-turn directions, as well as see their truck location displayed on an icon on the map itself. So, in the past, a lot of logistics companies and businesses, regarded these digital tools as kind of unnecessary expenses prior to the emergence of social distancing guidelines. But now, with the COVID-19 pandemic, it's really prompted a renewed interest in accelerating uptake in tools like the Final Mile. So the next one, as we see here on the screen, is a LiveTrack. So LiveTrack is an out-of-the-box solution which is designed to automate your customer service process by really enabling the visibility and tracking via web portal as well as a mobile app. So using, the Magaya LiveTrack, your customers and agents can actually log into their accounts from any internet connected device worldwide 24/7, and it provides them with access to cargo and inventory information, as well as any other related transactions on the fly whenever they want to consume it. So, they can do things like view and print their airway bills, bills of lading, photographs, and more. So with LiveTrack, you can really easily reduce the number of the customer service phone calls and the check-ins and the emails by just giving your customers the self-service access to the information they're looking for on their own terms at their fingertips. And then the last one that I wanted to talk about is a really awesome tool. I've seen this one in use in person, and it's incredible. So, when you're measuring every dimension of a pallet and taking photos and then downloading those photos and then making sure they're attached to the right record in your system and then inputting the dimensions manually, it's really a tedious, a time-consuming, costly, and really most of all, it's an error-prone process, right? I mean, we're humans. We just kind of look here and here, and we think that it's good. But the really impressive thing about the Magaya Dimensioner is it's going to take your warehouse to that kind of cutting edge warehouse technology and automation by capturing all of the dimensions accurately in under 5 seconds. And it also takes a photo and attaches that photo directly to the right record in the McGuire system. So taking all of the guesswork out of it. As you can see here, on average, our customers recoup at least $40 of lost revenue per pallet. And per pallet, I mean, that's huge. I know, Scott, right now, that's an insane amount of money, especially with everything going on, with the transactions between customers and forwarders.
And if you think about it too, you're seeing a lot of pressure from the U.S. Postal Service by the government to make sure that parcel operators or parcel companies are paying the right amount for them. And the last thing that I think any forwarder or anybody that's doing e-com or this final mile wants to do is to find that they're going to get a bunch of chargebacks, because the carrier that they're handling it off to is going to be weighing and dimming it and charging that back if there's a shortfall there. So if nothing else, companies want to make sure that they're protecting both their right to revenue and that they're not having to go back and rebill clients for these types of things as well.
Absolutely. So the great thing too is, if you're interested in calculating, your ROI with the McGuire Dimensioner, seeing how some of that activity would look in your own warehouse, we have a great tool, our ROI calculator, that we would be happy to share with you. So if you want to email hello@mcguire.com, and ask for that Dimensioner calculator, we'll happily share it and give you that ROI calculator. And really, you'll be amazed to see how much you can save with it. So back to you, Scott.
Thanks, Mitch. So I think that we need to make sure that we have a customer focus about that. That certainly underscored everything, the tools that McGuire is bringing forth, just the general way that we have to look at while we're taking care of our people. We also realize that it's even more critical these days to make sure that we're taking care of our customers, because I think that if we can create a positive customer, we're going to get someone who's a very good referral for us, and somebody who I think we've all sort of like adopted the ride or die philosophy with this through everybody, and the people who've been good customers that we've been good vendors for and just good partners throughout the entire transaction are going to be they're going to want to stick around, because we'll have gone through a difficult time together. It's just not unlike class of 2020 with drive-by graduation parades and proms and everything else. I think that this has created a unique set of circumstances that the companies that have worked together to mutually succeed and come out the other end holding on and still in business are going to have something special together with one another. And those loyal customers are going to be the best asset. I mean, I'm hearing from a ton of companies about just the calls they're getting: PPE, 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 PPE. Can you help me move PPE? Sure, it's possible to be able to move it, but the greater question is, can it get through customs? Can it get through FDA? Can we secure the space that's necessary to be able to move the goods? And these are entirely new customers that we haven't had an opportunity to establish a credit history or do anything with to make sure that they're going to be there. So you want to make sure that while some of this is coming out of the woodwork and you feel sort of a time pressure because it's constantly being behind, we cannot forget those loyal customers, and we have to put our customers' needs first. They're the ones that are keeping us going through all of this. They're the ones that are fighting just as hard to make sure that they're doing it. I mean, if they're in retail, they've got their own set of challenges. If they're in manufacturing, they have a set of challenges. If they're in healthcare, they have a set of challenges. So whether they're positive or negative challenges that they're going through, we have to make sure that they're the priority item as we do things. Remarkably enough, this has sort of also shown a light on the fact that how much technology do we have in this? How much technology are people using? And the issue is that 67% of companies indicated they're going to be investing in technology, and that's courtesy of the Institute of Supply Chain Management. And that technology investment means that we're now going to have to ask ourselves, what sort of tools do we need? What blind spots have been shown with what's going on? What can we do to automate to make sure that when we're able to get back together, we can establish these processes? How are we going to be able to make this work? We have one last poll question. I believe we've been able to work some of the technology gremlins out of the back, humorously enough. So let's take a shot and see if we are able to actually vote in the poll. The poll question is going to be, do you plan to invest in technology as a part of your pandemic recovery efforts? And again, we apologize for keeping you in suspense for the last poll question, but we certainly appreciate everybody that has stuck around, and hopefully it's been a seamless experience for all of you. Give it just a second for everybody else to finish. And let's see what those poll results are. Absolutely, so it's evenly split between yes and no. So maybe folks have already got that technology. Some folks are looking for some technology options, and we really do appreciate everybody for chiming in and sharing their opinion and sharing what they're planning on doing with this. So what are some of the key takeaways that we want to think about as we start to get to the end of the webinar and get ready to have folks have some questions? And I know Alfred's watching for those that may have popped up in the chat, so thank you for that. So the pandemic has demonstrated that we have to think about supply chains in entirely different ways. I mean, there's key lessons that are already emerging from this for us, including the need to build backup options into supply chains. We're seeing sourcing decisions being made, moving into different nations, moving into different regions, moving back here to the United States. Certainly as the July 1st implementation date for USMCA is coming up, people are probably, and companies are evaluating, okay, so what are the new changes under USMCA that make sense for me to go back to nearshoring somewhere within North America? Companies that rely on global partners are proving that they're better equipped to endure these pandemic-related disruptions. I know every time that there was something that happened somewhere in the world, I mean, going as far back as September 11th, I remember being at home watching that happen at 7:30 in the morning and just burning up the phone lines and the email to everybody all over the planet, trying to figure out what's happening, what's the reaction. I mean, those are the people that we have to rely on, because sometimes we get trapped in the local view of what's happening. And by local, I mean here within the United States. I mean, the pandemic has obviously proven itself to be global. And those people who have lived through it, are living through it in their own countries, are able to give us the best intel that when we talk to them, we bring that additional value to our customers. I cannot underscore enough how many times when I was fortunate enough to go travel and meet with my agent partners that I would be asking the technical questions about how things happen. What are the bills of lading process? What's the supply chain flow over there? Because when you can bring that level of specificity, that level of knowledge, that level of visibility to a client in their supply chain, you're bringing them more value than they could really get anywhere else from just a general factory chase for a rate kind of shop. Companies can also use their current struggles as an inspiration to develop broader supplier and provider partner bases that aren't tied to select companies or geographies. We've had to diversify. We've had to move around. What is this going to mean for us? And you know, while the pandemic may have caught us all flat-footed, there's an opportunity to redesign rather, not resign, to redesign the approaches so that when the next global disturbance happens, and it's not an if, it's a when, we'll be as ready as we can, we'll be as prepared as we can, and we'll say to ourselves, right, this is not just a disaster recovery plan, this is just a pandemic or whatever sort of coping plan. Let's face it, the thing that has made this unique has been the fact that it's impacted all of us, everywhere on the planet. This is not an earthquake that struck a part of the world. This is not a tsunami that hit a part of the world. This is not whatever sort of natural disaster or political unrest may have been confined to a country or a small region. This has impacted everyone. There has been no safe harbor as we've all tried to work our way through this. So that interconnectivity, that collaborative life experience that we've all had to share through this, I think is going to really sort of help provide an impetus for better, more global solutions than there otherwise would have been had we just had to go through this by ourselves in a vacuum. And with that, I'm going to say thank you very much, and I'm going to turn it back over to Alfred, and I'm going to ask whether or not we have any questions at this point.
Well, as a matter of fact, Scott, yes, we do. So let's dive right in. The first question that we have is from Kenneth. It's for you, Scott. It says, due to all the social distancing, do you predict an increase in demand for 3D manufacturing in the near distant future?
That's a great question, Kenneth, and thanks for asking it. I certainly think that 3D manufacturing is something that we've seen in fits and starts. There are very large, well-capitalized forwarders that have invested in this. I know that UPS has made an investment in it. I believe XPO has as well. Even in Italy, some people may recall that there was a critical part for a ventilator that wasn't available, couldn't get manufactured, and a bunch of enterprising people figured out a way to 3D print that. The question becomes, how do we now translate what may be core components or raw materials into an actual full-on spun-up manufacturing process? I think it'll happen. I don't know how quickly it'll happen. Like anything else, it's how fast will the technology advance. When we think about 3D printing, it's the filaments, it's the things that go into it, it's the materials that they're made of. And the question is going to be the products that can be 3D printed are going to be limited based on the materials that can be used to print them.
Perfect. All right. Thank you. Mitch, we have another question for you. Mitch, the question is, I'm learning the hard way that I need to have systems in place that provide visibility across my extended supply network. If I were to consider a logistics platform like Magaya, how long would it take for me to be up and running?
That's a really good question, and it kind of builds off of Scott's, point earlier about 67% of folks are looking to invest in technology right now, right? And I saw a quote from the Wall Street Journal that over 50% were planning on doing it, but after the pandemic was over. So, since that's kind of up in the air of when we don't know when that's going to be, one of the things that we want to point out is getting going with any platform is not a easy undertaking, but speaking specifically for Magaya, our platform, 3 to 4 weeks, depending on a couple factors. And so those 3 to 4 week time frame is going to depend on, if your team is engaged, able to do their homework, right, and kind of use this slowdown, right, or this period of a little bit of a dip in levels of freight, volumes and everything like that, to take advantage of putting something like that in place. And I think, and Scott had a good example of this that I'll let him bring up in a sec here, but, using this time wisely, right, instead of kind of maybe improving some things that don't necessarily need the tweaks, but putting the manpower towards, a new platform that's going to allow you to take advantage of that V-shape, recovery we have, or the slow exponential rise, is something that's a great idea at this point.
And I've talked to a lot of companies right now that are just sort of going through the internal process. I mean, from our point of view with what we do a lot of content. We do a lot of sort of issue-centric things for people. So the first, let's just call it from January, when it was an issue in China, up until what feels about like 2 or 3 weeks ago, it really was sort of breathless about how we just had to react. And companies felt like they had to just get that word out. And for better or for worse, it feels like maybe the last 2 to 3 weeks, it's settled into a more sort of calm TikTok of just getting back to business as whatever it is in today and for the near period of time moving forward. And companies have used that opportunity actually to sort of retool and look internally and make investments in those processes with a little bit of breathing time that they've got. So hopefully the companies that are on this call have been doing much of the same thing of just sort of looking internally and saying to themselves, where can we better ourselves? Where can we improve? Where can we do this training? Where can we get this additional education that lets us, when we're back in the offices and we're back working in a more stable in-person environment, how can we leverage that? Or are we more in person? I think you may have seen, Mitch, that Jack Dorsey, the founder of both Twitter and Square, has said that for all intents and purposes, Twitter employees don't have to come back to a physical office anymore. I don't see that happening for us because of the regulatory security regimes that govern the activities of forwarders, whether by air or by ocean. But it definitely does sort of question, do we need to have everybody there all at the same time? I don't have an intelligent enough answer for that yet. We're all still sort of feeling our way through that.
So it seems like there's no better time than the present, right?
Yep.
All right, we have 2 more questions we want to get to. Linda, this one's actually about the Final Mile plugin. My clients want to be able to see signatures and receiver's name populated on the delivery order. How can the signature and receiver's name be populated on the delivery order?
That's a great question. So I think, you have the visibility to that in the LiveTrack web portal itself. So you can absolutely capture that there. So as far as getting it on the delivery order, that's something that we'd be happy to take a look at. And it might be just writing a custom field into some of the documents itself. So, it is certainly a possibility. It just might be something that, our team, if you're currently a Magaya user, that we could help, develop into your current delivery orders, whether you have a custom document or not, or if it's one of the standard ones delivered. Or, if not, that's something that we would discuss during the sales cycle with you and your team to make sure that we have that requirement in place and set up ready to go for when you go live.
Perfect. Thank you, Mitch. All right. And this third question we have right here, actually 4th, I apologize, is from Ricardo, all the way from beautiful Mexico. LiveTrack is a great solution based on your presentation, but the thing is, how do we motivate clients to go online, visit their references and status? Is the industry ready to avoid sending an email or just go into the app and get the info? This is kind of a question more about how to get their clients to go into the LiveTrack app.
Yeah, it's kind of a twofold question. So maybe, Scott, do you want to talk about just the driving the behavior, and then I can talk about kind of the Magaya side of it if you'd like.
Yeah, this is always one of those really interesting ones because I've sat on a desk long enough to realize that 99 out of 100 questions are, where's my stuff, where's my stuff, where's my stuff? And there's people whose sole job is to sit there and find out where their stuff is. The thing that's changed in today's e-commerce world is that if you're in the B2B space, if you're a freight forwarder and you have your commercial customer, you're used to having that one-to-one sort of answer about my customer who is importing or exporting this widget wants to know what the status of their cargo is. And you could provide, in the olden times, whatever that is with my air quotes, you could provide an answer to that one customer and that would be sufficient. Well, because your customer may now have sold to 10, 100, 1,000 customers, whatever it is that's in that shipment that you're carrying, now you're having to realize the fact that you have to give that answer to not just one person, but to hundreds or tens or thousands of people down the line. And thinking about that is saying, we need to be able to automate this process because we can't answer 10,000 support calls. We can answer one or two because that's what we've staffed for, because that's our client relationship. But because of the visibility, because of the APIs, because of the connectivity, think about how used to people are to being able to get text updates from Shopify or from any of these other e-commerce platforms, knowing where stuff is. People have followed their goods with a large e-commerce provider named after a rainforest in South America. People are used to those tracking from one place to another. So we have to realize that demand that people feel in their private lives is going to be increasing for the demand that they feel in their business lives, especially since we've all been home for a couple of months now. And those two lines and lives are really blurring together.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Scott. And it's a great point, right? And so I think just driving that behavior that's already really embedded in us from, like I said, that kind of Amazonian world that we live in now, using the app, right? I understand that right now everything it's less antiquated than it was, right? I remember when I first started at my logistics job, we would still get faxes all the time. So it's improving, right? And so I think email was that first step in the right direction. And now moving towards an app, I think as soon as your customers really start seeing the value of that real-time information, and if you're working on a second or third shift and you want to see where a shipment is in real time, they're going to start seeing that value right away and having that information at their fingertips without having to wait for an email or make that additional phone call is really going to help drive that behavior. So, motivation wise, that's something that, we're working on with our Magaya network, right? To be able to say, hey, as you look at all these different supply chain partners, look at the ease that you're going to be able to communicate and grow your network and be able to succeed together. But also, it's just going to help as far as, hey, we don't need to send the email anymore. You're going to get an answer quicker, right? And probably get a more satisfying answer than an email back 20 hours later that says, still checking on it. Let me see where the driver is because he hasn't answered his phone. So I think that there's a couple things that work there, not only just the industry and just social trends, but the fact that as it's starting to be used, you'll start to see that value. And I think your customers would see that value too. And that's one of the things that our sales reps are great at talking about, and how to build that behavior and build that value in.
Think of the adoptive behavior changes, just to again take it to a consumer level, and two things just popped into my head. So if you were somebody who you were accustomed to physically buying a ticket for something, I have a ticket, but now if you're in the business of buying that ticket on the secondary market, you're now seeing how people are, and even Ticketmaster and the other platforms are now digitally able to move your ticket to an event from one person to another, as opposed to when one of those ticket sellers or ticket brokers would have to physically get a paper ticket and put that in somebody else's hands. So that's a spot where people have gotten used to more the wallets on the digital wallets on their phones to be able to have those tickets. Another thing that's just come up during the pandemic, obviously, telemedicine. How many people would think of doing a televisit with a physician? And up until this point, because they either you go to see a doctor, you get in your car, you get on the bus, and you go and you see a doctor. Now people are connecting with these physicians remotely because of the health consequences and the speed with which you're able to get to them. These are sort of the adoptive behavior changes that people either work their way into or find themselves forced into because of the environment that they happen to be operating in.
That's a great point, Scott.
Perfect. Thank you, Scott. We actually have time for one final question, and it's in regards to the last mile. How can individual shippers ensure customers get their orders? This one's actually directed to you, Scott.
Thank you. I think it goes back to that visibility piece again. It goes back to the vetting that forwarders do when they pick those last mile carriers, making sure that they've got somebody who can do it. It goes back to the visibility throughout the supply chain, and it really goes back to a steady diet of statuses. the last thing you ever want to have is something just sort of disappear in transit. So the key ability to be able to see things, to capture the handoff points, to get those status reports, whether or not it's something where you're using a vehicle that has a GPS tracker or locator on it, or just making sure that you can follow it from one place to another because the actual cargo itself maybe has some sort of tracking or monitoring device on it. It's going to be all about the visibility. It's going to be about the interconnectivity of it. A phrase that I'm seeing thrown out a lot this year is something called RPA, robotic process automation. It's been a very big topic of discussion within a lot of the tech circles, and think of it as almost kind of like Zapier or IFTT, or creating a shortcut on your phone where you have just sort of created the process to go through and do this to this to this to this to this. And that level of automation gets back to the point that we made during the presentation about being able to scale up. So as the transition moves from delivering to one retailer's warehouse to 500 ultimate consignees, you have to have that process to be able to scale up and do it on a repetitive basis. So I would say visibility, transparency, and the portability of that data. And then when it's all said and done, to be of the greatest value to our customers, once we have that data, what can we do with it? How can we crunch it? Where do we find the opportunities to present cost savings for them? Where do we find the opportunities to provide optimization and just more intel to do things like making sure that they have the right inventory in the right warehouse to match the demand? That aforementioned e-commerce rainforest named company, they're in the data business. At the end of the day, they are a data company. And if we understand that we have the opportunity as forwarders to have that data, to own that data, to mine that data and deliver value, it further creates that loyal customer relationship that nobody's going to want to go anyplace.
Perfect. Thank you, Mitch, and thank you, Scott, for all the information that you've shared with us today. I think that we can leave it off there. We're ending it on a high note. Like we mentioned in the beginning, everyone will be taking home a nice recording of this webinar. You'll have it in your email shortly. And if you have any additional questions that you think of, feel free to reach out to us on our website, magaya.com. Our email, hello@magaya.com, or you can always give us a call. And we hope to see you again real soon. Take care.